Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Thanks for restarting this. And as you said in the beginning, it's interesting that, whenever you start or restart this, I'm there. So let's see how many times we're going to do this. No, just kidding. So I'm Jay, or officially I'm called Jeroen, but don't worry about that. I'm originally from the Netherlands. My parents gave me a name that doesn't show a lot of vision from their part. I don't think they ever imagined I would live and work in a country that doesn't speak any Dutch. So I go by Jay. So feel free to just call me that. And yeah, I'm in the Power BI team and I focus on many things. I have an opinion on everything, basically, surrounded Power BI and many of the things around Fabric. But my day-to-day work that I'm actually responsible for, apart from just, having opinions, is the programming language everybody loves to hate called DAX, that you might be familiar with. So yeah, that's my work, and everything that has been happening in that space since 2020 is my responsibility, my end responsibility. I won't say I do everything alone. That's absolutely not true, but I carry the end responsibility and I make the final choice for what we're shipping and what we're not shipping and what that looks like. So yeah, that's me. And I'll start by sharing my screen. And apparently I don't need to introduce myself anymore. I'm too famous already. Okay, well I'll tell my mom you said that. And during this session, feel free to raise your hand or use the chat as you go to discuss or leave questions. I'll monitor it as I'm talking, so I can jump in and answer anything that's going on. This is your time. I can run through a whole slide deck, but we can also have discussions. Whatever you want goes for me. So with that, let's jump in. So I'm going to skip over my normal wait, who is this guy, right? Because I already did all of that. But here's my contact details in case you want to shoot me an email. I'm also on LinkedIn, and Twitter is my ex social media, and I'm on Blue Sky now as well, because, well, anyway, personal opinions about who owns X now. Anyway, I'll leave that out of this discussion. So really, when I think about DAX as our programming language in Power BI, it is a tough thing to think about, because we have heard for years and years and years that DAX is so hard that people are even shying away from using Power BI or even considering using Power BI and staying with the competition or adopting a competing tool just because DAX is so hard. That's a real problem for us as a platform, right? Because of course we want everybody to use Power BI, right? Of course we want everybody to be happy using Power BI, and we don't want to introduce artificial hurdles to make that harder than it has to be. So yeah, DAX is hard is a real problem. We have had that in the top 3 for the last 5 years or so. Consistent, our feedback has been DAX is hard, and people are actually quoting that as like a blocker for starting on Power BI adoption or even further adoption of Power BI. So the way that kind of starts and plays out today is this is how people normally write DAX these days, right? This is how I write DAX, to be honest, right? You find something and you copy it, you paste it, and you press your fingers, you cross your fingers, and maybe you invoke some higher DD if that's your thing, or no, or whatever. I'm not going to judge, right? That is it. That's how people do it. And you go find it. You go find it online. You go find it in the books, right? You go find it in this one or in this one. This one is famous, right? Like more famous even than I am, I think. Right, the definitive guide to DAX by Marco and Alberto, of course, Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari. So you read this, maybe you take the training, you read it again, you still don't get it, you read it again, you put it on your pillow, on your nightstand, like easy reading just before going to bed, you still don't get it, you're the 5th time around, the 6th time around, you still don't get it. That's where I am. Like, I own this language, and I have read this 5 times. I still don't get most of what's in here, right? And then, we have this one, of course, is Extreme DAX, which is a proud Dutch product from 2 Dutch MVPs, Michiel and Henk, friends of me. This is great because this is the theoretical foundation. This is not very practical, it's very theoretical. This is the practical application of the theory. So if you're looking for like, okay, I got a part of the theory, but now how do I actually do, for example, business to business calculations or inventory analysis or forecasting or intercompany business, as I already said, this is the stuff that you need because that describes how I apply the theory into those practical cases. So, but it's crazy that for you to be successful with the core programming language of the leading data analysis tool in the market, you need to take training and or read books or read blogs, documentation, etc., etc. It's crazy that that has to happen. And it's a real problem. And it's a testament to the quality of the rest of the product that we're the leading data analysis tool in the market, right? That we got this far with our core programming language being considered so hard. So to drive home that point, so if you ever try to do a running total in DAX in Power BI, you will very quickly, if you start searching for that Power BI running total, you'll come across a website that lists 21 steps to doing a running total in Power BI. 21. I'm not even asking for rocket science here. A running total is basic stuff. You don't need subtractions, multiplication, division. You don't need to know anything of that. You just need basic understanding of math. You only need the ability to add two numbers and keep doing that. That's how you get a running total. Anybody who's just basically starting with maths knows how to do this. And then here are we in Power BI requiring you to do 21 steps. That is 20 steps too many. This is the problem we try to solve. Not just for running totals, but in general, the problem is DAX is so hard for things that should be so simple. And let's face it, right? That's a hard truth we faced about 3 years ago. DAX is hard. And if you start thinking about why DAX is really hard, the problem is there's a concept called filter context. And filter context defines the outcome of your DAX expression. So when you type, for example, sum of sales amount, right? So sum, open parentheses, sales amount, closing parentheses. That sum of sales amount might take on different meanings depending on the context in which it's in, right? So it might mean the total sales of all products in all countries in the world in all years in my data set. It might also mean the total sales of green products in Miami in March of this year. That exact same line of code might mean two completely different things and 100 different things based on the context it's in. So that means that if I just look at the code, if I look at the one thing I wrote, I am unable to say what this will produce because the context in which it's in will define what it will produce. And we don't do a good job of explaining that to you and showing you that. So that is the issue. And filter context is something that we cannot get rid of, unfortunately. It is core part of our product. Like taking that out and getting rid of that would gut Power BI and would get rid of so much of the power of Power BI, we would basically kill the whole product and start over. So that's not something we can do. We, of course, can do other things. And that's really where we started 3 years ago. So the other thing that makes DAX hard is not just filter context. The other thing is, it's surprising, but referring back to what came before me is really hard in DAX. So what I mean with that is if you're doing a calculation row by row by row by row, if you're at this, let's say the 5th row, and you want to know what the value was for my calculation in the 4th row, or even a row next to me, a cell next to me in the 4th row, that's almost impossible to ask for. Like referring back to that is almost impossible. Hence, guess what? Many of the business type calculations that you do in Excel actually rely on that ability to refer back to what came before me. So if you can't do that, then suddenly all your business type calculations that your manager or your customer or your boss is asking for that you can easily do in Excel, they all go like, oh, it's just a drag and drop. Surely Power BI can easily do that. All of that suddenly becomes very, very hard. So then what we asked ourselves is 3 years ago, what if we could get rid of this? What if we could allow you to define a calculation without having to worry about what makes DAX hard, without having to worry about this filter context, without having to deal with this complicated model to execute the DAX in? What if we instead turn it upside down and allowed you to define a DAX calculation in Power BI without having to worry about this complexity? So how would we do that? Well, if you think about DAX as, or Power BI as a pipeline, the pipeline starts with data that's being loaded from the source and it ends with visualization, right? You're not loading the data for fun, you're loading the data to visualize it. That's the end goal, right? So when data is loaded, it has passed through data flows or Power Query, whatever, it's clean, then you model it. That means you have multiple tables, you put relationships between them. That's where you create your measures today in DAX, right? That's where you define your calculations, which is in the complicated model, you have to deal with filter context, the stuff that basically dictates what that measure is going to return. Then you go, and eventually you start building a visual. And in that visual, you drag some stuff from the model into that visual, and you say, you know what, I want to see year, I want to see, I don't know, product color, and I want to see sales amount from the model. And by doing that action, you paint that visual onto your screen. What happens between that model and that visual is the data is being calculated and aggregated by Power BI for you down to just the data points that we need to show the bars or lines or whatever thing you're showing in that visual, right? There might be millions of data points in here, individual sales records, for example, but over here, you're only showing a couple of things, right? 5 bars, six lines, whatever, right? That aggregation is happening by us. We're doing that for you. And then we're showing you that visual. What if we said, instead of requiring you to do these calculations here in this complicated world, we allowed you to do the calculations here in this simple world, where this aggregation has happened, the scoping down has happened as part of creating that visual? What if we allowed you to do it there? And what if, as part of that, we could easily allow you to refer back to what happened before? Wouldn't that be great? And then maybe we could even allow you to not type as much complicated things anymore. You could just express what you needed in, you know, stuff that felt very simple. And that, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else here, is what we call visual calculations. And visual calculations is an idea that was born in April 2020, or no, actually in May 2020, in its current iteration. I'm not the first one inventing this. I'm only the first one actually getting to this point in developing this. But the original idea is way older than before I was on the team, to do this kind of DAX calculations on the visual. Allow people to define a DAX calculation as part of the visual definition. So that is what visual calculations are. And we picked that name on purpose. They are very visual, and we'll see that in a second. So they are DAX calculations on a visual. So anything you know about DAX will still apply. You can still use DAX. You don't have to learn a new language. It's just DAX. You can refer to what's on the visual, including other visual calcs, so you can build your solution on top of others. You are scoped inside of the visual. You're not in the model. That is great news, because that means that all the complexity of what makes DAX hard is out of the window. You don't have to worry about filter context anymore. That has already been applied. You don't have to worry about millions and millions of data rows. We already did the aggregation for you. You just see the numbers you're working with. And then with that, you can actually also do nifty tricks that you can't do before, because suddenly we're now in the context of a visual. We can now refer to the axes of the visual and understand and reason about what's on this axis. So that's what visual calcs are. So these are the comparisons between calculated columns and measures and visual calculations. So we're not taking calculated columns away. We're not taking measures away. Those exist still. But visual calculations is a new kid on the block. Effectively, another way of saying this is, think about measures and calculated columns as if they had a baby together, and the best parts of that is visual calculations. Because measures are great because they are computed on query time. So this means they're dynamic. They don't bloat your model. They don't pre-compute stuff. They are very, very interactive with what the user did. The downside of measures is they're complicated because they work in filter context. Calculated columns have a big downside that they're pre-calculated. They bloat your model. They're not dynamic. So that's why most people don't want to use them. But they have a good thing about them, which when you define them, it's very visual. You can see it happening row by row by row when you define your calculated column. So what we said with visual calcs is, what if we take that visual aspect of calculated columns and that on-the-fly aspect of measures and put them into one? And that's what visual calculations are. So with that, I'm going to show you a slide that the world has never seen before, but it's an analogy that I've been toying with internally for a while now, and that is thinking about DAX as a swimming pool. So today, the reality is that if you jump into the swimming pool that is called DAX, you better know how to swim. Otherwise, you'll drown. You have to do the training. You have to read the books. You have to go reach out to some expert to be successful, apart from just, skimming on the surface. With visual calcs, we're introducing another end to the swimming pool that is not the deep end. It's basically the kiddie pool. And we're saying, you know what? There's a scale here. You can wade into the waters of DAX without having to worry about all this complexity, right? You can start with visual calcs. You don't have to worry about drowning. You can just use your common sense, your Excel knowledge, or whatever you have without having to take the training right now. And then when you're ready, once you're ready, if you're ever ready, if you feel the need, you can dive deeper and go further down into the waters and actually learn how to swim, take the training, read the books, etc., etc., etc. But you don't have to from day one. That's the problem today with DAX. You have to be successful. With visual calcs, we're actually giving you a way to kind of more gradually ease into it. So it's not a replacement for measures, absolutely not. It's just another way of thinking about it and easing your way into this this problem for later. So once you're ready, you can dive into the world of measures once you're up for it, if ever. Cool. So that's visual calcs. So what are visual calcs? They're WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. We like our acronyms. Point and click will be provided, so you don't have to type as much if you want to use point and click. We'll see that in a second. You're just working with what you can see on the screen. And we'll also have high-level functions for common business type calculations that people think should be easy. And then you can refer to the visual structure as well. So there's stuff that's there. And now, while talking, I realized that when we last met in Chicago, Cecile, I think I mentioned this. No? Did I name drop visual calcs there?
I think you introduced it for the first time.
Yes, I did.
Because it was NDA at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right.
And you even have that GIF image. People were like,
yes.
Remember? I have it on video.
That might actually come back in this presentation in just a second. But yes, you're right. So that was 2 years ago, right? It was May 2022 or so, or April even 2022, I think.
October, I think.
Okay, whatever. It was at least 2022 somewhere. It's all a blur. Anyway, it's been a long time. But yes, I was showing that for the first time ever because I got concerned that we were in like digging a tunnel underground and I was not sure whether the direction we were going was the right one. So I needed to come up for air and check whether the direction was where we needed to go. Then I went back underground and we kept going. And like since February of this year, we're finally above ground and showing you what we've been working on for 3 years and a bit. So that is what visual calcs are. That's where you might have heard this before or in any of the other sessions I've done since. So the one thing I want you to remember about visual calcs is the mental model. This is what makes visual calcs work. So the core premise here is that any visual in Power BI, regardless of how complicated you make it or how simple you make it, it can always be represented as a matrix. Anything, a bar chart, matrix, map, matrix, line chart, matrix, small multiple, matrix. All of it can always be represented as a matrix. There's no visual in Power BI that you cannot refer back to a matrix or show as a matrix structure. That's why we also have the show as table function, right? You can always show it as a table or as a matrix. So what we're doing essentially is saying, you know what? So there is for each visual, there is a matrix. And then with visual calcs, we allow you to play with that matrix. So you play with the stuff that's on the matrix and then you extend the matrix with columns and the matrix shows the data that the visual shows. So if I zoom into this one a little bit, if I can actually click, thank you. Okay, so if we zoom in, you'll see there's a chart here at the top, right? A column chart. It has 3 groups, let's say the years, and then 2 series, right? By the shaded gray colors. So what does Power BI need to paint this visual onto your screen? it needs 3 rows and 3 columns, because it needs the year, right? It needs to know what the name of the groups are, and then it needs a value for each of the series. So sales amount and total product cost, for example, that is the 2 series. So we need 3 rows and 3 columns, one row for each year, and then 3 columns for sales amount, product cost, and sales and year. So those are the 3 things that we need. That's all. There might be millions of data rows in here, but that's all we need. And that's essentially also what you're going to get with Visual Calcs. Oh, look at that. We have a youngest participant as well. That's awesome. Aw. So you're going to work with just that in Visual Calcs, and you don't care if it's millions and millions of rows under there. You're just going to work with the visual, the data that's in the visual, and the aggregated data that we already aggregated for you, because we need to paint that visual onto the screen. So, okay, so that's the thing you need to remember for Visual Calcs. And then the other thing is, you can decide what is being shown on the visual. So you're extending the visual matrix, but you get the chance to extend to decide what is actually being shown on the visual. So the visual matrix is the name of that thing that shows the data that's from the visual, right? So that matrix representation of the visual is what we call the visual matrix, and that's what you work with in Visual Calcs. And I see that I see there's indeed a picture now in the chat from that time. Thanks for finding that. That's awesome. Yeah, so if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'll also have, after the demo that I'm going to now, we'll have a specific point for more discussions and questions. So, but feel free to leave it in the chat. Okay, so let's go into the demo in here. Okay, so you should be seeing my Power BI desktop. There's no trickery here. This is literally our product right now. You can do this already. If you have Power BI desktop installed, you need to enable a preview feature, a public preview feature. And then once you have it, you can follow along with me. So I'm not pulling your leg. This is actually in the product, and I've been double checking that I'm not showing you the internal version that I'm not allowed to show you yet. This is the public version, so that's good. So I am going to just add some stuff to this to the screen. I'm going to basically recreate the thing that I built there in my slides. So I'm seeing now a total product cost and a total sales amount by years, and I'm going to show that like ascending. So the oldest years at the top, that just makes it easier to understand what's going to happen in a second. There's nothing major, nothing different around this thing, except that when I have that visual selected, there's a new button over here that's suddenly enabled called New Calculation. That's in the ribbon, in the home ribbon, right? If I not select this visual for a moment, that button is not enabled. That is your entry point to Visual Calculations, because this Visual Calculations are calculations on a visual. So for you to be able to define a calculation on a visual, you need to tell us which visual you want to work with. So calculation, select that visual, and then press New Calculation. You now are into what we call the Visual Calcs edit mode, which should feel familiar. You've just seen this on the slide, right? You see the visual on the top that you're working with. You see the visual matrix at the bottom that shows the data that's inside of the visual. There's a formula bar in the middle that allows me to enter calculations. And there's already an inviting cursor allowing me to inviting me to type. You can also see there's a placeholder for the calculation that I'm doing, right? So I can now just start typing my calculation. So let's do something very simple. I'm starting with an example that of course should have been a measure, but just to warm you up, we can do something called profit and say profit equals sales amount minus total product cost. Now, before I press enter on this, notice that I have not referred to the model. I have not referred to the tables. I'm not referring to anything outside of this visual. I only work with what I'm seeing here. That's the one thing I need to worry about, right? And essentially this now becomes almost like Excel. There's no aggregates. There's no need for me to write a sum around this. It is literally just the sales amount minus total product cost. I think anybody with basic understanding of math can understand what this thing does, right? And then, will this work? Of course this works. What this does is for each row, take the total sales amount, subtract the total product cost. That's all. Very, very simple stuff. And actually, this is already a big improvement, because the fact that people, when they have to write this in a measure, they have to do this. And of course, also include the table names. The fact that they have to write what is on line 4 now is the number one thing that beginner users of DAX struggle with. Like they first try what is on line number 1 in a measure, and then the measure says, can't do this, with some weird error message about multiple values, right? And then they have to go like, oh, I don't get it. Either they give up or they go to a more experienced colleague or whatever, because in Excel I can do this, right? It's easy. But no, you have to write that aggregate. And that's the first thing that trips people up. And once they're over that hurdle, of course, the next hurdle with calculate comes, and then your spine starts tickling the moment you type calculate because you're worried about doing something wrong. At least that's what happens with me all the time. So just having this ability is already a big step forward, but we're not even halfway to what all the cool stuff that Visual Calcs can do, right? Now, we also have this FX button over here that allows me to use some more point and click so that I don't have to type as much. But let's do something else. Let's say I wanted to do, and we'll get to those templates in a second. Let's say I wanted to compare the profit for each year versus the previous year's profit. Okay, so I want to get something that subtracts my current profit for each cell versus the profit above me. How would I do that? What would I write? So I'm just going to say versus previous. That's going to be the name. Well, of course, I need to get my current profit. Okay, so this is my current profit. Makes sense. And then I need to get the previous profit. How would I do that? Any suggestions on the function I would use for that? To get the previous profit?
Try previous.
Thank you, Polly. You just write previous. And then you say, I want the previous profit. Is it that simple? Yes, it is that simple. Imagine doing this today in normal DAX. Impossible. Without an earlier statement and a calculate and a max comparison and top and one tricks, it's impossible. This is so simple. Will this work? Of course this works. You can see it works. It just subtracts the profit and compares it against the previous year. And for this year, there is no previous profit, so you subtract the current profit from 0, right? You subtract 0, from the current profit, which is the same value, right? So that makes sense. This number is just that number minus that number. It is simple things. Okay, let's do something else. How about a running sum? We talked about the running total or running sum in the beginning. So how about a running sum? Let's do a running sum. Let's do the running sum of profit. Any guesses to the function I would use to calculate a running sum? You should know how my brain works by now. Come on. Any guesses? Anybody?
How about running sum?
There you go. Thank you, sir. Running sum. I mean, how did we ever live without this stuff? This is what it's so easy as it should be, right? Like, will this work? Of course this works. I designed this. Look, it's a running sum. Okay, let's do one more. A moving average. What would be the function for a moving average? You should know by now, right? Of course, the name of the function is called moving average, but you don't have to discover that. You can even use the templates to learn about these. We give you starting points to learn about these functions so you can discover what is here. Moving average, percentage of parent, percentage of grand total, average of children versus previous. We already did that one. Versus next, versus first, versus last. Moving average, I already spoiled it. Of course, that uses the function called moving average. Just give it the function, the things it needs to work on, which is the moving average of profit, and then, or sales amount, whatever. I can just do something else for a change. And then you have to tell us a window size, which basically says, how many years do I want to take into account, right? So I have years here. How many of those things on the rows do I want to take into account to calculate my average with? So if I say 1, it will just be a 1 of every year. So it's not going to be an average of every year individually. It's not very interesting, right? It's not an average. So 2 might be a good one, right? So for 2018, we're going to take the average of 2018 plus nothing, because there's nothing before me. 2019, That will be the average of 2019 plus 2018. And then 2020 will be the average of 2019 and 2020. So with that, done. Will this work? Of course this works.
Yeah.
And then,
Brian,
oh,
Y.
so I created my beautiful visual calc over here. It's awesome.
Y-A-N.
Okay, so we, of course, have created beautiful visual calcs over here. It's great, but if you've been paying close attention, I kind of messed up my visual, right? My visual looks very ugly right now. It is horrible. I'm not a visualization guy, but even I can tell that it's not the best visual ever. I'm not going to say that the thing I'm going to create next is the best visual ever, but we can do better than this, for sure. So what if I just wanted to only show, for example, the versus previous calculation and maybe the running sum and moving average, but I don't care about the sales amount, the total product cost, nor the profit. So would I want to delete things? Well, I mean, you would be inclined maybe to delete things from here, right? To not show them on the visual. But then you will remember the rule that I said is this thing can refer to what's on the visual. It cannot refer to anything else. So if I delete something, it would break, because then sales amount doesn't exist anymore. So then this whole house of profit, previous profit, running sum, profit, moving average would stop working. So what else can I do? Well, if you look over here, you'll see a familiar icon, the little eye icon that you might know from the model view. And this allows you to hide stuff from your visual. So if you select that, you'll see your visual matrix is not changing, but your visual is changing. And then I'm moving some stuff to the tooltips to even, move it further around. And now I have the visual that I was after, just showing the previous profit comparison year over year back out to the report. And now we see a brand new visual that was never here before, created, showing very advanced calculations, or not very advanced calculations, calculations that were very hard to do before, you created using very simple DAX, just 4 lines of DAX, right? One line things that I think we can all agree were very simple to do. That is now showing this in that visual. And that is the power of visual calculations for you. Now, of course, there's a whole bunch of stuff underneath all of here, but this is the core premise, making DAX as easy as it should have been from day one. Cool. So now we get to the questions part, and we get to the by now famous or infamous slide with the little give on it. There we go. So this is what we've been working on for 3 years and a bit, and I'm excited to learn from you and hear from you what you think and any questions you might have. I see. Sorry, I need to switch screen. I don't know, Eddie.
Yes.
If that's your first name, okay. Go for it.
So, I've had a requirement where I need to put a row number on a visual, and they wanted to export it to Excel. You know how the whole world is stuck on Excel, blah, blah, blah. And the problem with Power BI is you can throw an index on it in Power Query.
Yes.
But as soon as you start using filters, it breaks it.
Yes.
Okay, it breaks the running row number. Okay.
Yes.
And there's nothing to rank on this.
No.
I'm saying in my report, there's nothing to rank on. I mean, I've tried everything. And I wasn't able to do that. Are you able to do that with this?
Of course. What do you think the function name would be?
Row number?
Let's try.
How did I know that?
It's here. Now, this is not as easy as it should be, though, because this is a function that we introduced as part of window functions, which is something you can use outside of Visual Calc, so you don't have to do it in Visual Calc mode. So it requires you to do a little bit more setup. You see there's a whole bunch of other parameters that you have to set up. You can absolutely use row number as part of measures as well. So I'm getting ahead of myself on how we built this thing, but row number is a function you can use to do this. Alternatively, you can also, so if I just do this, It will just work. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, there's no formatting, I know. Right? So yes, you will have the row number. Downside of this in Visual Calcs is no, today you cannot export this to Excel yet. That is disabled. That's because we simply haven't built the code yet. It's not that we don't want to, it's just we haven't had the time. So we will do this. So if you do this in Visual Calcs using just row number, open parentheses, closing parentheses, you'll get what you want, but you cannot export it, which for your use case is not great, right? But once we build this code, it will do that. Sorry, you were saying?
In my case, that wouldn't work because I have to export it in Excel.
Right. So, but what you can do is you can use the same row number function in a measure. It's also available there, but this requires you to set up a little bit, right? So it says, you know, for example, I need all selected of, and this is again a great example of how DAX is not easy, right? Sales amount, ordering by.
So that's the problem. I don't have a sales amount field. I don't have a dollar amount, a number field to put in there because I've tried everything online and nothing worked. Are you able to do that if you don't have a sales amount field?
Of course. I mean, Power BI likes its numbers, but let's say, I don't know, I have some text over here, just a fiscal year and a fiscal quarter, whatever, just a table, right? Let me drag the fiscal quarter in, whatever, it's just text, right? Just happens to be years and quarters, but these are not numbers, right? Do the new calculation thing, row number. Oops. Done.
All you did is put in row. Oh, no, not on the Visual Calc. I'm saying Visual Calc won't work for me. I'm saying in a measure.
You can do the same thing for the measure. You can do the whole trick, and I'm not going to write it right here because I'm that bad at DAX, right? It just shows that I'm that bad. But you can do this thing with row number, using in a measure, plugging in the right values for your relation, the order by, and the partition by. If you send me your case on email, I'm happy to look at it and write it for you.
Oh, no, I wouldn't want to do that. I'll take your word for it and I'll try some more.
Row number is your friend here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And it just painfully shows how much we need this, right? That I'm unable to crack this case live writing code. That shows that DAX is too hard.
Absolutely.
Yep. Cool. More questions?
Can
Just
we get that
question?
sticker?
Sorry?
Can we get that sticker?
Well, as a matter of fact, you can. I've got it right
really?
here.
Nice.
I got it here. So, yeah, find me on a conference near you at some point and hunt me down. You can get this sticker. Or if I haven't ran out of it by then, you can get this one, which is the DAX dog.
Ooh.
You know, the dachshund, right? In English, the wiener dog, officially called dachshund. So I woke up one Sunday morning. I was very proud of myself. I came up with a pun in a different language. The dachshund. Perfect. So I made the sticker. Anyway, so yes, I have both stickers in my bag. They're limited edition because I paid for them myself. Marketing didn't give me any budget. So find me, you can get the stickers.
Cool.
Anyway, more questions? No? All good? Like, are we loving this? Are we hating this? Are we concerned? What's the vibe? Yes. Go for it. Sorry, I'm gonna... I don't know how to pronounce your first name without actually butchering it. So sorry about that.
It's okay.
Sorry.
It's an Arabic name, so it's a bit complicated. Yeah. So I start with something. Sorry for my English. I'm from Morocco, so I'm not very good in English. I'm not fluent, and it's midnight in Morocco, so I just want to sleep at this moment. But I can't miss this meeting. So. Or this event. I try one time when I say one of your comments on LinkedIn defending the visual calculation. So I say, wow, you defend visual calculation so hard that means that there is something behind this visual calculation. So I try to use this how can I say this option, and unfortunately I can't use it with in all visual, and I use it just when I try to test something. But that's all. For most of the time, I need to create this measure, because this measure, when I will create it in visual calculation, I need to have the same in another page, in another visual.
Yes.
So I need to create as a measure. This is the first I have with this visual calculation. And the second one, I don't know if it's just feeling or it's just my model, but I feel like the performance with the visual calculation, it's not very good like measures.
Okay, so two things: reuse and performance.
It took more
right?
time to have the results.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So keep in mind, this is in preview since February, right? So we're only a couple months in. And if you go to our docs, I'll find the link. I'll paste in the chat when I have time, or maybe Cecilia can find them for me. Thank you. You will see a long list of limitations. There's a limitation on visuals that you can use, features that you can use if this format is not available yet. Field parameter is not available yet. Export is not available yet. There's a long list of things that we still need to work on. Now, you asked for, I'll tackle the performance first. If you look at that list, it'll say performance has not been optimized. Performance is not representative of the end product. In general, we should already perform better than measures by about 500%, so 5 times as fast as a measure. But yes, there are many cases in which we don't. But our end goal is to just work on the aggregated data without going back to the source. And we haven't done the performance optimization yet, but once we did that, your visual calc should be about 5 times as fast as your measure, because we're only going to use the aggregated data that we have, right? Like the stuff that I showed you in my screen, right here, I'm only doing a running sum over the 3 years, right? There's no need for this calculation when it's executed to go down to the lowest level of data, all the individual millions of records, like a measure does. You can just use the aggregation. Now, that has not been implemented for all cases, so probably what you're seeing in your situation is that you're hitting something that we haven't done the optimization, but we will. So that's number one. Your performance will be better than a measure, full stop. Almost regardless what you write. Like in our tests across the board, it's better than a measure. It's faster than a measure. There is a big downside, and that's the other one, is that today you cannot reuse this thing, right? As you said, if you write a calculation on a visual, you cannot reuse that same calculation in another visual right now. You cannot refer to that same calculation and say, take that thing that I just wrote and use it in this other visual. You can't do that today. That is also a limitation. Something that we're working on. We're actively thinking through what that story is. And I just had another hour of discussions with our team about how that's going to work and what we can do to improve that situation. Will they be as reusable as measures? Never. Why? Because measures are in the model. If you give it a score from 0 to 10, right, on how reusable they are, measures score an 8 because they are reusable across the whole model. You can reuse them across reports a little bit, but they don't score a 10 because they're not perfect across reports. But just for the whole model with all the pages and all the visuals, you can reuse them everywhere. They're great. Visual calc score maybe 1 or 2 out of 10. Our vision is they should score about 5 or 6 in reusability. Not as good as a measure, because if we wanted to reuse them as a measure, we need to put them back into the model. And that is negating the whole idea of visual calcs, because we pulled them out of the model to get you out of this complexity of DAX, right? So us putting it back into the model means you have to worry about filter context again. You have to worry about the things that makes DAX hard again. And that's what we're trying to get rid of for you, right? So there's a trade-off. We give you less stuff to worry about, less complexity, easy to use DAX. You get less reuse. And right now, the reuse is non-existent for visual calcs. That will be better. We will improve it, but it will never be as good as a measure. If reuse is that important to you that you don't want to sacrifice anything, then the only answer ever will be measures. You will then have to live with the complexity of DAX. So that's the answer to this situation, right? We have lots of limitations, and reuse and performance are two of them, out of the many. And I think Cecilia has found the link. Thank you for doing that. And just keep that in mind while we're doing this preview. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Cool. Anything else? Anybody else? I thought there was another hand.
Yeah, Ed, you had a question?
If not, that's fine. I can keep going. Well, if you have more questions while I'm talking, feel free to jump in. So, okay, so I've shown you visual calcs. What are they? They're just calculations, DAX calculations in scope of a visual. There's no new language. It's just DAX. Most of the DAX you are used to will work. For example, if you have a switch true statement that you wrote maybe in a measure to divide your sales orders into small, medium, or large things, the classic switch true thing that people do, this you can absolutely just copy paste into a visual calc and it will just work, right? Actually, this is a calculated column example, whatever. Basic arithmetic, I showed you that, will work. And new visual calcs functions, I've already showed you many of those will work. There's a couple things that won't work. And that has to do with the fact that you're now inside this little box and you cannot refer back to the model, right? We pulled you out of the model. So functions that refer back to the model cannot be used. So a function called related or related table or use relationship cannot be used. Why? There's no concept of a model here. It's just one table, one matrix you're working with. So related doesn't mean anything because there's nothing related to here. For the context of the thing you're just writing, it's just one box. So there is no data model to speak of. So those functions will not work. If you ever have questions about which functions are available, which are not, of course you can try it. Or if you go to our docs, any docs page from our documentation now will show you, for example, why do I always go to the internal version of this? Crap, I don't want that. Oh man, here we go. I don't want to see the internal version. Okay, so if we go into here, right? So here, any function that you look up for Power BI, for DAX right now, comes with this little header at the top that somebody, me, created, that shows you exactly whether or not that function is available, right? So it shows you, hey, this collapse function that we haven't talked even about yet, this is the quickest one I could find, is available for visual calculations, but not in measures, not in calculated columns, and not in calculated columns and calculated tables. Okay, so if I do the row number, where we talked about already, that is available everywhere. You can use it in calculated tables, calculated columns, measures, and visual calculations. Oh, and here are examples of how you would use it, right? In a calculated column or even in a visual calc, right? So Ed, you were talking about this function. Here are the examples of how to use it. And you can see how different it is, right? This is the stuff that you would have to write, well, barring the evaluate, but this is the stuff you would write for a calculated column. This is the stuff you would write for a visual calc. So it becomes way easier. Make sense?
Yeah.
So you can just look at all these functions and see whether or not they're available. You will also find some functions that are available but will probably not return sensical results. So those are functions we discourage for use. They are technically available. They will work in some cases, but not in many cases. So we said, well, instead of just blocking you outright, we'll just allow you to type it, but they won't do anything. So if I start to type something that we didn't provide in Visual Calcs, so for example, I'm going to go in here and say new calculation, and I start typing use relationship, that thing is not even there. Oops, use, right? I can try to use it, but the moment I use it, it will just give me an error, right? So that's one way. The other way, of course, when you're writing in a measure and you try to do, for example, running sum, you'll very quickly discover this goes like, what is running sum? Because it has no idea, right? Because running sum is not available in measures, only in Visual Calcs. And why is that? Well, it's because we have a little trick up our sleeves that we haven't shown you yet, or I haven't shown you yet. And that's, remember when I said we can refer to the visual structure? And that is actually what makes Visual Calcs work. So Visual Calcs, the functions that are exclusive to Visual Calcs, refer to the axes of your visual. And the axis is the direction in which that visual calculations traverses that visual matrix that we were talking about. So axis is a very important concept to think about. So the default of axis is rows. So that means that calculation is being executed row by row across the rows. That's how you should read this. We'll also show you the little icons in the product. I'll show you that in the product again in a second. But you can also do the calculation left to right across your visual matrix. That is then across the columns. So that's the other axis, right? Across the columns. So you would use columns and you will see the left to right little arrow. You can also combine these and say, I'm going left to right and then snake down, like in a Z movement or a Z movement across your visual matrix, or rows columns is the N movement. We go down first and then we go left and right across your visual matrix, right? So you have either top to bottom, left to right, or in a Z shape or in an N shape across your visual matrix. Now, these last two columns, rows and rows columns, honestly, we just put them in there because we could. You know, I don't expect many people to use them. We are not seeing lots of people using it. Rows and columns are the ones that most people are using. And in fact, I've been using rows all the time, but I haven't shown you it yet, right? So if I go in here and actually don't break my Visual Calc for a second, and I go, you know, back into the screen, I can actually go in here, my running sum, and say, you know what, this is actually a running sum of profit on rows. See the little icon in here? Did I have my zoom it on? No, I don't have zoom it on, sorry. But I can probably just turn it on. Anyway, if I click on that, you'll see the rows, right? The little icon disappears, but the values won't change. I don't have zoom it. I did have it. Anyway, okay, whatever. So it won't change my values, right? I can do whatever I want, but it won't change my values, right? Because that's the default axis. So by default, any of these Visual Calcs exclusive functions will just do the calculation row by row by row. You never questioned this because it makes total sense, right? When I said previous, of course you expected me to go previous up, right? Across, not left to right. So if I write previous, same thing. Previous is just doing the previous on rows. And of course, there's another parameter that I can define. How many steps back do I want to take, right? Default to 1. I can do previous 3 and just skip a whole bunch, right? So rows is the default axis. And then you also have columns. And columns you can only use when it's available currently. So if I go into a matrix, for example, a matrix actually has columns because I can put stuff on columns. So I can say, you know what, I'm going to move fiscal year, whoops, I'm going to move, hello, is that a bug? What's going on? I'm going to move fiscal year, thank you, to columns, yes, I know. And then I'm going to put product category in here. So now all of my calculations are still running on rows. So all of these numbers have now changed. Why? Because I never told it that it should run over just years. I just said, just do rows. So whatever happens to be on rows, which is now category, not year, is now happily being calculated over, right? If I wanted to calculate over the years, and years are now on columns, I can switch this around and say columns, right? And now we'll do a running sum again over the years because they are now on columns, right? So this is how that axis works. And then we have the two other versions that will hopefully or might actually break your brain. So I'll show you the examples. So first of sales amount on rows is basically saying for each row, retrieve the first sales amount from the first row. I haven't even shown you that function, but I think by the word first, you understand what it does. Get the first thing. Look at the color coding. The dashed lines refer to the solid lines, right? So for each column, we're going to find the sales amount in the first row, which happens to be the sales amount for that year for the accessories category, right? Great. Let's turn it around 90 degrees. Now we're going to do the first sales amount on columns. This means for each column, retrieve the first sales amount from the first column. So now we're not looking per year, but we're looking per category. So now you'll see that the red lines, the green lines, the blue lines, the yellow lines, they all match up because every column will now for each year return the sales amount for that category for 2018, for the first year. Make sense? Okay, let's do the more advanced ones. Hold on to your hats. Previous sales amount on rows columns. This means for each cell, retrieve the previous sales amount from the row above it or from the last cell in the previous column. Confused yet? We'll see. So look at the colors again, right? So I can take my pointer and we'll show. Okay, so this one makes sense because, well, let's start with this one. This is empty. Why? Well, there's no row above me. So there's nothing, right? And there's also no column to the left of me. So if I just wrote rows, this would have been empty. But since I wrote rows columns, I can also look at the column to the left of me. There's also nothing. So there's nothing for me to get here. This one, well, that will just get that one. That one, that one, that one, that one. Here, this would have been empty if I wrote previous on rows because there's no row above me. But since I wrote rows columns, I can also just look at the last value from the previous column if there's no row above me. So we'll just get this value. So this now moves as an N movement across your visual matrix, top to bottom, then left to right. Turn it 90 degrees, we do the same thing. Rows, columns for each cell, columns, rows for each cell, retrieve the previous sales amount from the column to the left of it or from the last cell of the previous row. This one empty. There's no row to the left of me. There's no column above me. There's nothing. No column to the left of me. No row above me. There's nothing I can do. This one, there's a column to the left of me. Get the value. This one, there's a column to the left of me. Get the value. This one, there's no column to the left of me. But since I wrote columns, rows, I am allowed to retrieve the value from the previous cell, the detail cell on the previous row, right? So the last cell on the previous row, that's the value. And the yellow one will return a yellow one. Is this very useful? I doubt it. There's limited situations in which you want to use this, but it is available. But the core premise of Visual Calcs is you have to understand this axis thing. That is what makes it really shine. Okay, so that is the one thing I wanted to show you as well. And then the other thing is another trick. Okay, the last trick is reset. And reset is something that we're still kind of working on. But the idea is that we would allow you to restart your calculation while it traverses your visual matrix, right? So your direction says, this is how I'm going to move over my visual matrix, top to bottom, left to right, or any of the patterns that we just talked about. And then with reset as a parameter, I can then say, while this transversion is happening, while I'm navigating over this visual matrix, is there any point in which I want to restart from 0? And if there is, you can tell us, right? By default, reset is set to none, right? So it will never restart. But you can say, if, for example, if I do a running sum of sales and I have years and months, if I write running sum of sales, what it will do is, well, actually, I'll just show it. It's maybe even better. Just do something. I'll start over. Simple new visual, so you don't get confused. Sales amount and years and month. And I'm just going to show that as a table because that's easier to understand what's happening. Okay. Maybe as a matrix. Let's do matrix. Why not? That one. Okay. Cool. So I have this great new calculation. Okay, so I'm going to see the fiscal years and then the months. Okay, makes sense. So if I do running sum of sales amount, well, this will just happily start summing the sales. And when it arrives at the end of the year, it will just keep going, right? So for 2018, does this make sense, right? Probably your business user actually wanted you to do the running sum within the year. And then when the year changes, they probably wanted you to restart from 0. That's actually what they had in mind when they said, can you do a running sum of sales? Nobody in their right mind wants to sum across the years in this kind of case, right? They want to sum all the months in the years. And then when the fiscal year ends, they want to restart from 0 again. So how can we do that? Well, reset to the rescue, because I can now say reset by, so I just, I skip all the other stuff that I don't have to play with because I leave them to the default. I can just say highest parent, which will basically say whoever is the highest parent on the direction I'm going over the rows by default, right? So to visualize that, rows. On the rows, the highest parent here is fiscal year. So that means for every time that fiscal year changes, I'm going to restart. So with this in mind, what this will do is we'll now, for that new year, we'll start again from 0. So I just wrote a running sum in the months per year, restarting for every new fiscal year, which was what your business user wanted, using one line or very simple DAX that once you know how this works, you can easily replicate and do it again, right? Yes, of course, this should be easier. Yes, of course, I should be able to just say fiscal year here and make it work. And I don't think it will. No, that won't work yet, but that's something we're still working on. But so in the end, it should be something like this, right? Sales amount, rows, and then maybe, I don't know, some indicator that tells you this is the reset for fiscal year, right? Like when fiscal year changes, I'm going to restart. But right now, you have to either type in a number or just tell us highest parent, and of course, there's lowest parent as well if you want to reset on every lowest level. And this is then how you would do a reset. So that's the power of reset for you. So that's that. So that's the last concept I want to talk about. And if you've seen DAX before, you might be wondering, where's calculate? And we're trying not to take calculate away from you. It's still available. You can use calculate. You can absolutely write calculate. But you shouldn't have to in Visual Calcs, because calculate is the one function that trips people up. The moment I write calculate, I get like, tingles on my spine and go like, ugh, is this going well? Am I sure I'm going to do it the right way? So we decided to avoid that. But actually, when you write our Visual Calcs functions, you are using calculate all the time, but you don't have to worry about it. So let me explain. So with Visual Calcs, we aim to fatten the donut. That may sound weird, but what I mean is, if you think about DAX as a donut, and walking on the sticky surface of the donut is great, but DAX has this center where the black hole of calculate lives, where the complexity is infinite, and very quickly after you embark on your journey of walking on the sticky surface of the donut, you enter in the middle, and that's where the problem starts, right? That's what I said in the beginning. You have to learn the ropes. You have to take the training and the books, etc. What we aim to do with Visual Calcs is not to turn the donut into a pie. Yes, Cecilia, you were waiting for this one, of course. I had to mention the pie at some point. No, we're just fattening the donut. We're broadening the rim of the donut so you can walk on the sticky surface longer. Will you never have to use calculate? You might have to use calculate at some point, but for the majority of your cases, you shouldn't have to, right? So how does this work? Well, when you type first sales amount on year, which is another way of saying get the first sales amount in the years instead of rows, what this expands into, so what we run under the covers is actually a calculate of sales in first of year, and that in itself expands into calculate of sales of index 1 of year. Now, index is a function that has been around forever well, not forever. December 2022 is when we released that. That's part of the window functions. And actually these Visual Calc specific functions like running sum, moving average first, last, previous, next, are all just shortcuts to those window functions. So this is what we use under the covers, which you don't have to worry about, but just so you know, it's there, right? So if you ever run into trouble with these shortcuts, you can always expand them into the more complicated calculate call and get all the flexibility, but trade some of the ease of use and get more complexity, but also get more flexibility so you can tweak it to exactly what you want. So in case you were worried about us hiding stuff away from you. It's not well, we're hiding it a little bit, but we're not taking it away from you, right? It's still there if you want to play with it. Cool. So with that, I'm gonna move to my last slide, which is if you have any questions, feel free now or later. And please try out Visual Calcs. Try it out today. Install it, enable it, take it for a spin, give us feedback. Here's the link, aka.mesh/visual-calculations-feedback, and let me know, because I need your feedback, right? The only way I'm ever going to be able to ship this feature completely with the complete vision that I have is for you to try it and use it, because if you don't use it, I won't get the investment to actually finish it. So, and we have a lot more to do. Like what I'm showing you today is about 1/3 of everything that I'm envisioning for Visual Calcs. Like there's way more that I'm planning to do, which I'm not ready to talk about right now. There's more functions, there's more functionality. I promised you something with point and click and less typing. Oh, I did an awful lot of typing, right? So there should be more of that. But I can only start building that and keep building that if you give me usage and positive feedback. So thank you so much for taking the time, and I'll happily take any more questions or concerns or feedback right now.
Woohoo! Awesome. Questions, thoughts, feedback, ideas, wishes. Be careful what you wish for.
This is the time.
I don't know if is it Nuaman? Nuaman? I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Nuaman was asking about the user culture.
Yes. Can we use that in a calculated table? Yes, you can. You should be able to use it in a calculated table. You should be able to use it everywhere, actually. If at least unless I made a mistake in the docs, but I think if we go in here, user culture, there you go. It says it's available everywhere. So unless I made a mistake.
I tried to use it with the calculator table, and I wasn't able, and I don't have an example right now to But with the field, for example, I believe that the field parameters have the same function way like tables. So I tried to use this user culture with the field parameter, for example, and I wasn't able.
Well, keep in mind that the user culture will only work in the browser, right? It doesn't do anything in your desktop. Like you won't see anything dynamic happening in the desktop, only in the browser.
Exactly, because
yes.
So maybe I will explain more the problem. So I have I'm working on a French market. Some users, they are English. So I build one dashboard with the two languages in the same time. Culture. If you have French as a user culture, you will have the measures in English and vice versa. But with field parameters, for example, that doesn't work. I have a message error that's message right now. I can find an example in net. Just try to find the right error message.
It should work. If it should work with your measures and row level security objects. So if it doesn't work, you found a bug. So I invite you to also go to sleep, because it's late over there, I know. But please send me the issue you're facing. You like I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay.
And please send me that email, or find me on LinkedIn, whatever. Send me the PBX and a screenshot of what you're seeing, and I'll look at it. You might have found a bug, but it's supposed to be working. Okay?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, good night.
Something like this.
More questions?
So when can I use a Copilot and just tell it what I want it to do and have it do it automatically?
I knew this question was going to come up. So DAX is not easy for Copilot to generate, right? You can already use the DAX Copilot to generate measures, right? You've seen that maybe in a DAX query view in the product, right? We haven't built, well, so the challenge is the DAX Copilot to generate measures works because there's a whole corpus of information out there about measures in DAX that Copilot has been able to train on, because measures have been around for 7 years. So there's a whole knowledge base. When Copilot was trained, it learned about measures. So it is able to do that. It is unable to generate visual calcs. Why? Well, the corpus for visual calcs is this thin compared to the measures corpus, right? So it hasn't learned yet. It takes time, or it takes specific training that we can give it to learn about visual calcs and train it specifically for it. But the general ChatGPT or LLMs that you find out there will not be trained to give you a visual calc, because there's simply no knowledge they have been trained on yet. So that's why that is not available yet, right? So we're thinking through that, we're working on that, but it's not high priority, to be honest, because there's loads of situations where people don't want to, cannot, are not allowed to use Copilot. And we cannot just say, oh, just slap on Copilot and we'll solve all your problems, right? There should always be a way to do it without Copilot. So for us to even allow you to use Copilot, we first need to build the experience that allows you to do it without Copilot. So we need to build that first. And once all of that is done, then we can slap on Copilot and say, hey, if you have access to Copilot, if you want to use it, you can use it. You can now use Copilot to do the same thing that you were able to do on your own, right? But without this basic ability for you to do it on your own, there's no chance that Copilot can ever do it, right? Because Copilot is just doing what you could have done, but then for you, right? It's not replacing you, it's helping you, right? You can ask it to generate a report. You could have created the same report. It would take you way longer, but you could have done this, right? You could have you could typed in the DAX measure. It would have taken you way longer, but you could have done it. Visual Calcs has so much things we still have to do before we can even allow Copilot to train on it. So it will take a little bit, but eventually, yes, you will just be able to say, Copilot, give me a visual calc that calculates the running sum of sales over years resetting, or over my months resetting by year, and it will just spit out the visual calc for you. But today, no. Just takes time. So great question, but no. Not yet. It will come though. It will come.
Hi, Jay.
Yeah.
Alex from the UK. Just wanted to say, really enjoyed that.
Shouldn't you be asleep?
Like
Sorry.
I should be asleep. That was going to be my next part. If you any chance you can bring them in a bit early, that'd be great.
Which Copilot or what?
These meetings.
Oh, yes. I mean, the problem is, of course, I'm 8 hours behind you in terms of time. So yeah, unless we meet early morning, then it's better for you. Around this time, of course, it's bad for you. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So, but anyway, thanks for being here and staying up that late. I really appreciate it.
It's my first one, and I've really enjoyed it. I've had